My name is Danielle Carter. I'm 42 years old, and I work a civilian logistics desk at a defense contractor's office outside Quantico. Most people see me and assume I'm just another quiet woman with a color-coded planner and sensible shoes. They're not entirely wrong. I do like things neat, silent, in order. I don't like being seen. And for the last 8 years, I've built my life to be invisible. But the night my brother ripped my shirt in a crowded veterans bar, everything I'd hidden came into the light, and not just the tattoo. It was supposed to be a quiet evening. Murphy's was packed shoulder to shoulder for the annual Marine Corps birthday bash. Retired and active duty Marines, families, a few local bikers who claimed they'd served back in the day. The mood was loud but good-natured, lots of clinking glasses and hoarse auras. There was even a cake-cutting ceremony planned. I wasn't there to socialize. I was there to listen to the man on the stage, General Raymond Nolan. 4 stars, the commandant himself. He was the keynote speaker, though I doubted anyone else knew that I'd known him since I was 18. Long before he wore those 4 stars. I took a back booth, kept my coat on, and ordered a soda. I thought I could slip in, listen, slip out. I should have known better, because Michael saw me. My brother entered 10 minutes after I did, smelling like whiskey and misplaced pride. He was flanked by 5 guys wearing Desert Vultures patches on their leather vests. An unofficial biker club made up of ex-military, ex-convicts, and full-time troublemakers. Michael liked them. They let him talk like he still wore the uniform. He didn't. He lost that privilege a long time ago. "Would you look at that?" I heard his voice from across the room. "Murphy's letting civilians in now. Must be lowering their standards." I didn't turn. I stared at the ice cubes melting in my drink. But Michael never knew when to quit. He walked up, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "You still telling people you served? Come on, Danielle. Folding paperwork and licking stamps at HQ doesn't count. You were never a real Marine." The table behind me went quiet. I felt it before I heard it. The shift in energy, the tension in the air. A few people looked away, uncomfortable. He leaned in. "You know what she is?" he announced to no one in particular. "She's a fake soldier, all bark, no bullets." There it was, the word. Fake. It hung in the air like a dare. I could have stood, could have shut him down, could have reminded him of the things I'd survived, things he would have run from, but I didn't. I just looked up at him with the same calm I used to use on terrified villagers and dangerous informants overseas. And that calm must have driven him mad. Because then he said, "You want to act like you're one of us? Prove it. Let's see that tattoo you always hide under those long sleeves." I didn't move. Michael turned to one of his biker friends, a broad guy with a snake inked down his neck. "Hey, Donnie, what do you think? Should we see what she's hiding?" Donnie didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, grabbed the collar of my shirt, and ripped it straight down the back. The sound of tearing fabric was louder than any gunshot I'd heard in combat. My coat and blouse fell open, exposing the black tank top beneath, thin, standard issue, and the full design inked across my shoulder blades. A low gasp rippled through the bar. The eagle, globe, and anchor spanned from one shoulder to the other, black and red and shaded in with meticulous detail. Below it, words curved like a scar over my spine. 3rd PSYOPS Battalion, USMC, but what silenced the room weren't the words. It was the scars, wound tracks, shrapnel, a burn that twisted the skin just under the left wing of the eagle. My skin told its own story. The laughter died. Chairs stopped scraping. A bartender dropped a glass. No one said a word, except the man on the stage, who hadn't moved once since I walked in. General Nolan lowered the microphone slowly. His eyes, sharp as ever, locked onto the tattoo, then onto the man who'd torn my shirt. For a moment, no one breathed. Then came his voice, quiet but steady, like a court-martial sentence being handed down. "Son, you just threatened your commandant's daughter." Dead silence, the kind that sinks into bone, the kind you don't recover from. Donnie, the biker with the snake tattoo, visibly swallowed. His hand dropped away like it had touched fire. Michael's smirk cracked instantly. He turned pale, eyes darting around like someone had just shouted, "Incoming!" And me? I stood still, not in fear, not in shame, but in full awareness. It was over. My hiding, my silence, my protection of people who never earned it. The general stepped off the stage without another word. He didn't need more than those 7. In Marine Corps culture, Commandant's daughter was not just literal, it was tribal, protective, absolute. People made way for him without being asked. He walked right up to me, not touching my arm, not making a show, just standing beside me. "I thought you might show up," he said. "Didn't think it'd be like this." I gave a humorless smile. "Neither did I, sir." He looked down at the torn fabric in my hand. "You all right?" "Nothing new." He nodded slowly, then his voice dropped to something softer. "You don't have to keep doing this, shrinking yourself." I said nothing. He glanced around the room. Everyone was still frozen. He tilted his head toward the hallway. "Come with me." I followed him without a word, past the stunned crowd, past Michael who couldn't even meet my eyes. Someone reached out to clap me on the shoulder. Another whispered, "Semper Fi." In the hallway, Nolan stopped and pulled a small wooden box from his coat pocket. "I've been holding this for a while." I opened it slowly. Inside was a dog tag, scorched around the edge, and a folded piece of yellowed paper, my father's. The map of the final position where he'd been reported missing in action during Desert Storm. "He carried it into that compound," the general said quietly. "They found it 6 weeks later with his remains. I didn't give it to you before because I wasn't sure if you wanted to carry it." "I carried him anyway," I said. His eyes softened. "You remind me of him, not in how you fight, but in how you stand, silent, unmoving." I swallowed. "They think I lied. About everything." He raised a brow. "They did. Now they know better." The hallway was silent except for the muffled music resuming in the bar, but I knew nothing would go back to normal, not for me, not for Michael, not for anyone who watched my shirt tear open and realized they were looking at someone they never really saw. I folded the dog tag into my palm. "So what now?" Nolan's voice was firm. "Now you stop letting people like him speak louder than your truth." I nodded once. It was the closest thing to permission I'd ever needed. Because in that moment, I understood. The real battle hadn't been overseas. It had been the years I spent denying who I was. And it was finally time to stop. You don't just wake up one day and decide to disappear. Disappearing is a process, quiet, deliberate. You make small decisions. Change your haircut. Stop wearing anything with a unit patch. You move to a town where nobody asks questions about your past, especially not the kind of past that leaves scars you can't show. That's how I ended up doing logistics support at a contractor's office 15 minutes outside Quantico. It was the kind of place where everyone minded their business. Civilian, quiet, paper pushers mostly. And I liked it that way. My desk was always in the corner, close to the window, but never near the door. I came in before anyone else. I made the first pot of coffee. I checked the supply inventory, updated procurement sheets, and scheduled service appointments. I wasn't technically required to sweep the floors, but I often did anyway. There was something calming about cleaning, order, predictability. I didn't speak much at work. Most of my colleagues called me ma'am, even though I asked them not to. They said it just sort of came out. Maybe it was the way I stood. Maybe it was the way I looked people in the eye just a second too long. Nobody knew what I used to do. That was the point. At the office, I was just Danielle Carter, early 40s, no spouse, no kids, quiet, polite, dependable. I filled out requisition forms in perfect black ink and brought in banana bread on Thursdays. I lived in a one-bedroom walk-up with a view of nothing and a cupboard full of protein bars. That was my life. No combat, no past, no noise. But no matter how carefully you curate silence, someone from your past always knows how to break it. For me, that someone was Michael, my older brother by 3 years. We grew up in a small house in Virginia, the kind where the TV was always on and the dinner table was a battlefield of its own. Our father, Major Alan Carter, was a Marine. Not just any Marine, either. He was the kind who led from the front and never came back. Desert Storm took him. We were told he died in action. Michael tried to follow in his footsteps. He made it to boot camp, then barely through his first deployment before he got caught stealing equipment. Night vision goggles, I think. He said it was a mistake, said he was framed, but the dishonorable discharge said otherwise. He never let it go, not the shame. not the feeling of being the failed son. And when I joined the Corps 2 years later, Michael didn't speak to me for months. When he finally did, all he said was, "Guess the wrong kid decided to wear the uniform." At first, I thought it was a joke. Later, I realized it wasn't. Michael and I were different in every way. He was loud, impulsive, always needing attention. I was quiet, careful, methodical. He got into fights. I wrote reports. He wanted medals. I wanted meaning. But even after everything, I tried to stay connected to him. I sent him money when he couldn't pay rent. I lied to our mother about why he left the service. I even covered for him when he got into trouble with a biker gang a few years back. He never said thank you, not once. Instead, he started referring to me as the janitor of the Corps. Said I cleaned up data and polished brass, but never fired a shot. At family barbecues, he'd joke about how I spent my years behind a computer screen, organizing PowerPoints. Everyone laughed, even our mother, who didn't know any better. But what hurt the most wasn't the mockery, it was the dismissal. Michael didn't just minimize my service, he erased it. Every time he told someone I'd never been in combat, he took something I bled for and crumpled it up like trash. But I let him. Because for years, I believed that quiet was the price of peace. That if I kept my head down, stayed small, and let people believe what they wanted to, I could finally live a life where nobody needed me to fight. I was wrong. Because silence doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it invites the kind of violence you thought you'd left behind. And when Michael walked into Murphy's bar that night, drunk, cocky, and looking for someone to step on, I saw it in his eyes. He didn't want to just mock me this time. He wanted to break me. He didn't know I'd already survived worse. He didn't know what I was. And I'd spent so long hiding, I almost forgot myself too. But that night, when he called me a fake in front of everyone, when his biker friend ripped my shirt in public, he forced the truth out of hiding. And when the truth showed up, it came wearing 4 stars. I was 14 when the knock came. It was raining, one of those long, cold Virginia rains that soaked through your socks and crept into your bones. My mother had been washing dishes. I was on the floor with my school books, pretending to care about algebra while really trying not to think about what we hadn't heard in weeks. My father had been missing in action for 21 days. Major Alan Carter, 1st Marine Division, intelligence officer, my hero, my anchor, my reason for wanting to do more than just exist in this world. When the knock came, I already knew. I didn't need a uniform at the door to confirm what the silence had whispered for days. But it wasn't just any officer who stood there. It was Colonel Raymond Nolan, my father's closest friend and field commander. A man whose name I'd only heard in passing, through the hurried, half-coded stories my father used to tell when he thought I wasn't listening. Colonel Nolan didn't wear sorrow the way other people did. He wore it like rank, quiet, solid, dignified. He didn't fumble with his words. He didn't offer cliches. He stepped into our living room, took off his cover, and looked me directly in the eyes. Then he handed me a small cloth pouch. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was my father's dog tag, scorched on one edge. The chain rusted where blood had long since dried. I clutched it so tightly the edge cut into my palm. I didn't let go. I still haven't, not really. My mother sobbed quietly in the kitchen, trying to stay upright. I just sat there, numb, holding the weight of everything that had been left unsaid. Colonel Nolan sat across from me. He didn't speak for a while. When he finally did, his voice was low but steady, like the kind of voice you trust without question, even when everything else is breaking. "Your father died saving lives, Danielle. Intelligence said there were civilians caught in the target zone. He went in to confirm it himself. He wasn't ordered to, he just did it." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He continued. "He bought them time, bought them a way out, and he never came back. That was all I needed to know. Not how, not why. Just that he did the kind of thing most people don't even think about until it's too late." Then the colonel leaned forward and placed his hands on the table, hands that looked like they'd carried too many burdens. "I've seen men live long lives and never make a fraction of the impact your father made in one moment. He was one of the best I've ever known. I wanted to believe that. I needed to. I think he saw the doubt on my face, the disbelief that my father could be gone just like that. So he said something else, something I've never forgotten. If you ever choose to follow in his footsteps, don't do it to honor him. Don't do it because someone expects you to. Go because it's yours. Go because you have your own mission. Walk in with your own name. He paused, then added, but if you do, and if you fall, I'll be there to help you stand again. He meant it. I don't think I understood the weight of that promise then, but I would. One day, many times over. After he left, I didn't talk much for a week. I kept the dog tag under my pillow. Every night, I'd curl my fingers around it before I fell asleep, like it could somehow keep me tethered to something real. Years passed. I graduated high school with average grades and a quiet heart. People expected me to take a scholarship, study psychology maybe, get a safe job. But I kept remembering those words. Walk in with your own name. I enlisted at 17 and a half. My mother cried. Michael scoffed. He told me I was chasing a ghost, said I wasn't tough enough, wasn't built for it. I didn't argue. I just signed the papers and shipped out. Boot camp didn't break me, it shaped me. Every blister, every shouted order, every test of will was a brick in the foundation I would build for myself. I didn't use my father's name to get ahead. I never told anyone about Colonel Nolan. I didn't want shortcuts. I wanted scars I earned. Over the next 2 decades, Nolan kept his word, quietly, in the shadows. When I was passed over for a field promotion after Ramadi, he made sure I was reassigned to a unit that actually valued psychological operations. When I was wounded and medically cleared too quickly, a proper recovery rotation suddenly opened up near San Diego. He never showed up at ceremonies, never called attention to himself, but I always knew he was watching my 6, and I made sure I never gave him reason to regret it. That's why, when he walked down from that stage at Murphy's Bar all those years later, holding a small wooden box, I already knew what was inside, and I already knew what I had to do next. I thought I could keep my distance. That was the plan. The Marine Corps birthday bash at Murphy's Bar had always been a big deal. It wasn't formal, not dress blues and medals kind of formal, but it carried its own weight. There was tradition in the room, a kind of silent agreement that stories would be told, brothers remembered, and rivalries set aside for one night. This year, though, it was more than just the usual crowd. General Raymond Nolan was slated to give a short speech, a quiet acknowledgement of his final year as commandant before retirement. He'd insisted on no cameras, no press, just Marines. Active, retired, and ghosts. I wasn't planning on staying long. I came early, sat in the corner near the far exit, ordered a ginger ale, and kept my coat on. I didn't want to be recognized. I wasn't even sure if Nolan would notice me in the crowd. That was fine. I didn't need him to. I just wanted to hear him speak. Maybe hear him say something that would help me believe I'd made peace with who I used to be. The music was low, the laughter had started to rise. Some of the old-timers had already taken over the pool tables. The bartender nodded at me with a faint familiarity, but didn't push conversation. Then the front door opened, and Michael walked in. It was like the whole room shifted sideways. He wasn't alone. He had 5 men with him, beefy, sun-leathered types in tight denim and biker leathers. All of them wore the same patch, desert vultures. One had prison tattoos up both arms, another had a limp. One of them scanned the room like he was casing it. Michael led the pack. His hair was shorter than I remembered, buzzed tight, but the swagger was the same. He smelled like a mix of bourbon and regret. Loud, like always, laughing like he owned the place. I sank lower in my seat, but I already knew it was pointless. He saw me before he even ordered a drink. Well, 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 he said loudly, walking toward me. If it isn't Sergeant Clipboard herself. His voice sliced through the chatter around us. Heads turned. A few people raised eyebrows, a few chuckled. Michael thrived on reaction. Didn't expect to see you here, sis, he said. Mock surprise dripping from every syllable. Thought you only showed up to events that involved spreadsheets and coffee filters. I didn't answer. I kept my gaze down and sipped my drink. He pulled out a chair across from me and dropped into it without invitation. The chair groaned beneath him. Still hiding behind that quiet act, he asked. Come on, lighten up. It's a party. I said nothing, just like I always had. He leaned in, grinning, and said in a mock whisper, You know, I keep telling people you were in the Corps, but no one believes me. I mean, you don't exactly scream war hero. His biker buddies laughed behind him, high and sharp. I recognized that sound. It was the sound of men testing boundaries, testing prey. I mean, remind me again what you did, Michael said, sitting back and raising his voice enough for the nearby tables to hear. Something about PSYOPS, manipulating minds. Sounds made up to me. I breathed slow and steady. He wasn't drunk, not completely. He was doing this intentionally, trying to get a rise out of me, trying to pull me into a scene, and I refused to give him that. He slammed his hand on the table suddenly. Don't ignore me, Danielle. That's always been your problem. You think you're better than the rest of us. I looked at him, finally, eyes calm. No, Michael. I just stopped playing the same game. That landed. His face twitched. You think you're so righteous, don't you? He sneered. Just because you got through without getting caught. You hid behind your little desk while real Marines bled in the dirt. There it was, the root of it all. His shame, my silence, his belief that because my work didn't leave a trail of shell casings, it wasn't real. I stood slowly, keeping my voice even. Go home, Michael, he grinned. Ugly and mean. Or what? You'll out-paperwork me? Behind him, one of the bikers laughed and nudged another. I bet she doesn't even have a tattoo. Probably just tells people she served to get free drinks. Michael's eyes lit up. Oh, you should show them, Danielle, he said, turning to the crowd now. You all want to see something hilarious? My sister claims she's a Marine. Says she did 3 tours, but she won't ever take off that coat. Won't ever show proof. Wonder why. I didn't respond. I didn't move. He reached for my sleeve. Come on, let's prove it. Let's see what you've really got under there. Someone stood up at the next table. I didn't look to see who. That was when General Nolan's voice cut through the bar, still firm from the stage. That's enough. Michael froze. Everyone did. The commandant hadn't moved from his place by the mic, but his voice landed like a gavel. The room fell still again. My heart slowed. I kept standing. Michael looked at the stage, unsure. Then Nolan's gaze swept down and locked on me. And in that silence, I knew this wasn't just about Michael anymore. It was about the years I'd spent pretending I wasn't still standing on the battlefield. And that battle was far from over. The air had turned tight. Even before the words left his mouth, I could feel the shift. The kind of shift you feel in a war zone, right before someone crosses a line they can't uncross. The biker who spoke wasn't the loudest of the group, but he was the one watching me the whole time. Not Michael. This guy was taller, thicker, beard halfway to his chest, sunglasses still on indoors. His name, later, I'd learn, was Razor. A nickname he probably earned by slicing through bar fights, not field manuals. He leaned forward, hands flat on the table where Michael had been shouting. His voice was low, almost amused. You ever fire a weapon, sweetheart? I didn't blink, didn't look away, just answered flatly. I did my job. That should have been enough, but it wasn't. He tilted his head, like a dog unsure if it heard something right. Your job? He repeated. What's that mean? Coffee runs for real Marines? A few of his buddies chuckled, not full belly laughs, but dry little coughs that smelled of whiskey and contempt. I was PSYOPS, I said, still calm. Psy what? Psychological operations, I clarified. He stood up straighter, crossed his arms, smirked. So, like you mess with people's minds? Tell stories to make bad guys cry? His tone was taunting, but not curious. He wasn't asking to understand. He was asking to provoke. I recognized the game. I didn't answer. That was mistake number 1. He took a step closer. So let me get this straight. You didn't shoot, didn't fight, didn't bleed. But you still walk around like you've earned that Semper Fi ink? You collecting free beers on someone else's back. More laughter behind him. One of the bikers slapped the table and muttered, Stolen valor, ain't that something? I stayed rooted, not because I was scared, but because I was trained to stay still when tension spikes. You learn to measure before you respond. You learn that silence can be stronger than shouting. And sometimes silence saves lives. But not pride, not here. Look, I don't care what stories you've told your friends, Razor said, stepping into my personal space. But this is a Marines bar, and in a Marines bar, You don't wear a uniform you didn't earn. He nodded at my coat. You got a patch on that arm. You got a stance like you think you belong. He paused. So I got one question for you, lady. The bar had gone still again. The old-timers at the far end were watching now. Even the bartender had stopped wiping glasses. You got proof? I didn't answer. I didn't nod. I didn't defend myself. I didn't owe him proof. But to men like him, silence is guilt. His voice hardened. That's what I thought. Then he said it. Fake soldier, pay up. The words hit harder than I expected. Maybe because it wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every woman I'd known who'd been questioned. Every Marine whose scars weren't visible. Every mission that never got medals because the paperwork was redacted. Michael stepped forward again. Come on, Danielle. If you're the real deal, show 'em. Otherwise, buy the round and quit pretending. He said it with a smirk. Like this was all just a joke. Like the last 10 years of my life were a costume I wore to feel important. I didn't move. Razor reached for his wallet and pulled out a 20, slapped it on the table. That's what one real Marine's drink costs. You match it, or walk out of here a fraud. Still, I didn't speak. I didn't give them what they wanted. That's when the air cracked. Razor lunged forward without warning, grabbing the collar of my coat. The sound of ripping fabric tore through the bar like a bullet. My jacket peeled open, my shirt torn at the shoulder. His hand yanked downward. And there it was, my tattoo. USMC, PSYOPS Battalion. Below it, a faded date, and beside it, an old scar shaped like the edge of a rifle stock. The bar went completely silent. Even the jukebox seemed to hush. Razor froze. His hand still held the torn edge of my sleeve, but his eyes were locked on the ink. He let go like it burned him. His face turned a shade paler. One of the older vets at the corner table stood slowly, mouth parted. Michael's smirk collapsed. His eyes darted between me and the tattoo like he was trying to recalculate the last 5 minutes in reverse. That was when it happened. From the stage, without a microphone, without even raising his voice, General Nolan spoke. 7 words. The 7 words that changed everything. Son, you just threatened your commandant's daughter. I didn't turn to look. I didn't need to. Because those words weren't just meant for the biker, or for Michael. They were for me. And something in me, something long buried, stood up straighter. For the first time in years, I remembered exactly who I was. I could feel the silence settle like a heavy cloak around every soul in the bar. Razor's hand still gripped the ripped fabric of my coat. The biker circle stood frozen, breaths held. Even the jukebox stuttered mid-song. Then I saw phones rise, subconscious reactions to the unfolding drama. Someone behind me whispered, "This is going online." Michael's voice cut through, panicked and loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's not true. She's not." His words crashed into the cold logic of authority. General Nolan didn't flinch. His eyes never left me. Without stepping onto the bar's stage again, he made his way to the chair beside me. The silence parted just enough for his voice, steady, compassionate, to break through. "Son, you just threatened your commandant's daughter." That statement did more than stop the biker in his tracks. It redefined everything in the room, including me. The bar, moments ago charged with hostility, felt like a battlefield left for dead. In that breathless moment, judgment gave way to resolve. General Nolan leaned in, then reached into the breast pocket of his dress coat. I watched as he pulled out a small, polished wooden box, light reflecting off its surface in a soft glow, like the end of a dawn breaking slow upon open water. He placed it gently in my hand. I didn't open it. I flew under a storm of eyes, friends, enemies, ghosts of my past. I felt the weight of what it must have meant for these Marines to learn their friend's daughter had never bent or broken out of fear or guilt. Michael stuttered, his posture shrinking. Eyes that had once boasted stability now flickered with a mix of confusion and recognition. The bikers, their tough exterior riven in disbelief, looked away. The air hummed with tension. And yet, within my chest, a familiar heartbeat pulsed, quiet, steady, grounded. I looked down at the box in my lap. I felt a truth in that moment. I wasn't hiding anymore, so I took a breath. Let the silence stretch. Think of a whisper that could change everything. But then something shifted. Just a soft click. The lid half opened. Inside lay a dog tag, my father's, scorched and bent. The edge bristled with the memory of fire and resolve, and tucked beneath it, a folded yellowed piece of paper, his hand-drawn geographic coordinates. That dog tag had lived with Nolan until now, waiting, not for me to carry it as a legacy, but as a truth I had to embrace. I raised my eyes to his, and saw the same quiet strength I remembered. Not pride, not expectation, just trust. I knew what was inside, I said, voice low but certain. He nodded. It was never just about surviving. I held the tag between my thumb and forefinger. The metal was cold, but warm somehow, weighted with promises no one could break. Thank you, I said. It was small, but it carried everything I needed him to hear. He turned without another word, and as I watched him pass through that sea of Marines, I understood how someone could command silence, not by fury, but by presence and love. Around me, the bar buzzed, phones glowed, conversations started up, sharp with awe, full of reverence. But in that moment, I felt clear. My fight hadn't ended. It had merely changed shape. And I was ready. The dog tag in my palm still pressed into my skin as the crowd melted back into their seats, the buzz of whispers beginning to fade. But my mind wasn't in that bar anymore. It was somewhere else, dusty, hot, and unforgiving. Fallujah, 2005. I was 23 when the mortar hit our checkpoint. The impact shredded the sandbags, flipped the table, and tossed me like I was weightless. When I came to, I was pinned under twisted metal, half conscious, bleeding from the side of my neck. They pulled me out 3 hours later. I had just enough strength to whisper the radio call sign before I passed out again. I woke up 3 days later in a field hospital. Bandages thick around my ribs, IV in my arm, and a dull ache that reached down to my bones. But what caught my eye wasn't the monitors or the sterile white ceiling. It was the message taped beside my bed, printed in a black marker in handwriting I recognized. We don't throw away our own. Stay alive. That's an order. Nolan. At the time, he was still Colonel Nolan. He didn't visit. He didn't call. But that note hit harder than a parade of generals. I'd met him once before, years earlier, right after I finished language immersion in Virginia Beach. I was selected for a trial track in psychological operations. Not many women were back then. It was a quiet nod, something whispered rather than announced. Nolan had been there, behind the mirrored glass during my simulation tests. He never spoke to me directly, not even when I scored the highest in my cohort on linguistic adaptation and nonverbal de-escalation. Just a glance once, measured, unreadable. Later, during a rotation at Fort Bragg, I saw him again. He nodded at me in the hallway once. I remember thinking, he's watching, but never intervening. Like a mountain in the distance, solid, unmoved, but always there. After Fallujah, I transferred out of active field work for a while. I took desk duty at a secured facility in Maryland, partly to heal, partly because silence was easier than noise. My body was mending, but my sense of self was scattered. The mission that defined me was over, and no one asked where I went. Except Nolan. He didn't ask exactly. But 6 weeks into my new posting, a book appeared on my desk. Behavioral Architecture in Hostile Zones. Inside the cover was a sticky note. When you're ready, page 147. That page held a case study about disinformation campaigns and the power of silence as signal, not absence. That was the moment I understood what he was doing. He wasn't pushing me. He was offering presence. Not loud, not demanding. Just there. Still, I never called him Dad. Not once. I couldn't. That word belonged to another man. A real Marine who died before I finished high school. Major Alan Carter, my father, my hero. But Nolan? He never tried to replace him. Never stepped into that role with arrogance or pity. He just showed up, precisely when I needed him most, and never a second too early. I remember a winter training course in Missouri. I was assigned to an intelligence war game, with senior officers observing. My scenario broke protocol. I manipulated a response by embedding cultural cues in civilian broadcasts. I won the scenario, but I also broke rules. They were going to pull me. The next morning, the recommendation was mysteriously withdrawn. I never asked. I didn't need to. Years passed. He rose in rank. I stayed in shadows, paperwork, encryption, internal control audits. I saw him on screens more than in real life. But even from a distance, he was there. Never reaching in, never rescuing me from the work, but never forgetting I was doing it either. He let me earn my stripes in silence, and that silence spoke louder than medals ever could. Tonight, at the bar, I had seen something shift behind his eyes when he approached me with the wooden box. Not pride, not shame, just certainty. Certainty that I had reached a line in the sand. And this time, he would not let me retreat behind it again. The man who wasn't my father had never once claimed the right to call me his daughter. And yet, when he said those 7 words, "Son, you just threatened your commandant's daughter," he wasn't lying. Not to them, and not to me. Because somewhere between that hospital bed and this veteran's bar, the truth had already settled. He was never my father, but he stayed. And sometimes, that matters more. The wooden box was still heavy in my hands when the military police stepped into the bar. Quiet, deliberate, no dramatic handcuffs. Just a firm hand on Michael's shoulder and a curt, "We need to speak outside." He laughed, tried to wave them off. Then he saw their patches. These weren't local police. These were internal investigations. Office of Naval Intelligence Liaison. Men who didn't show up without purpose. He turned pale, muttered something about a mistake. But they walked him out before he could spin another story. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I already knew the truth. It had lived under my skin for years. Michael's file had crossed my desk once, by accident or fate, I still don't know. It was back when I worked internal control routing at Fort Meade. I was buried in thousands of clearance renewals, identity validations, and exit logs. I scanned forms faster than I read emails, until I saw the name, Michael Allen Carter. It made my stomach twist. I thought, what the hell is he doing in a level 4 vetting file? He wasn't active duty anymore. He shouldn't even be in the system. Then I saw the red flags. Unauthorized weapons discharge. Inventory manipulation. A small informal ring trading access badges and equipment for cash. It wasn't espionage, but it was close enough to burn careers. And there, at the bottom of the report, was the one thing that stopped my breath. Suspect provided intel on base transport timing in exchange for private gain. Dishonorable discharge recommended. But no discharge had ever been processed. No criminal charges. The paper trail ended abruptly. I dug deeper, off record. Found a memo marked voided, at request of family member, classified internal. No signature, no trace. But I remembered the week everything changed. Michael had moved back in with Mom. He said it was a transition period. He drank more, yelled louder, swung from jokes to rage in seconds. And I stayed quiet. I used my credentials to bury the flag on his file. I'd told myself it was to protect Mom. She already lost a husband. I couldn't let her lose a son, even one so broken, so cruel. I thought if I erased that line from his record, I could erase the shame from our family too. But you can't protect people from the truth forever. It always finds its own way to the surface. What I didn't know then, what I only learned years later, was that Michael had kept going. Selling stories, inflating his rank, showing up at biker events with fake commendations, claiming special ops status he never earned, even wearing a Purple Heart once, while I sat home cleaning blood off medals I never told anyone about. And then, that night at the bar, he'd gone too far. He forced me to stand, to be seen, to show the one thing I had left, my truth. The tattoo was never meant to be proof. It was meant to be private. A part of my story no one could take from me. PSYOPS, USMC, burned into my skin after the last op, after the loss of my best friend in Kandahar, a mark not of glory, but of survival. Michael had torn my shirt, thinking it'd be a joke, thinking he'd win a bet, that I'd shrink again. Instead, he gave me back my voice. But now, sitting in the quiet aftermath, I felt nothing like victorious. I felt betrayed. Not just by him, by myself, because I had protected him. I had used my clearance to cover up his mess. I had buried the truth to spare his shame. while he spat on everything I'd fought for. It was like standing in front of a mirror and realizing the reflection was wearing your uniform, but none of your scars. People always assume betrayal comes in loud moments, screams, slammed doors, final words. But this betrayal had crept in like fog. It wrapped around my legs slowly. By the time I noticed it was suffocating me, I was already kneeling. I watched the door swing closed behind the officers, watched Michael disappear into the back seat of a black, unmarked car. No cuffs, no shouts, just silence. And I understood something deeply, bitterly true. Sometimes the people we protect the hardest are the ones who'd burn everything we love just to warm their hands. I had spent years believing silence was mercy. But mercy without accountability? That's just cowardice wearing kindness like a mask. Most of the crowd had cleared out. The video of the confrontation had already hit someone's feed. I could see the light from a screen flicker across the floor. Whispers gave way to silence. People vanished into the night, unwilling to look me in the eye, afraid of their own laughter played back on loop. But one man didn't leave. He stayed in the shadow near the jukebox. Leather vest, weathered face, hands that fidgeted with the seam of his jeans, like they didn't know what to do when they weren't holding something heavy. His boots didn't move, but his eyes never left me. I knew he was one of Michael's crew. He had laughed too. He hadn't tried to stop the shirt from being ripped. But now he wasn't sneering. He looked ashamed. After a long pause, he took a single step toward me, then another. "Ma'am," he said softly. I didn't know. I didn't speak." He cleared his throat. "Name's Reggie. I was in Helmand, 09 to early 11, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines. Didn't last my full tour. That got my attention. Helmand wasn't something you lied about. Not if you'd actually seen it." "You got out on a medical?" I asked, voice still low, arms still folded. He nodded. "Yeah, TBI and other stuff. I still see the same stretch of road when I try to sleep. Doesn't matter what bed I'm in." He rubbed his neck, eyes darting away. "I ain't trying to make excuses. I saw your tattoo. I should have known better, should have stopped it. But I froze, just like back then. I didn't say anything right away. Let the silence stretch. Let him sit with it. Sometimes the quiet does more than yelling ever could." He took one step closer. His voice cracked. "Truth is, I haven't worn anything with that flag in years. Felt like I didn't earn it. Got out before I could finish what I started. Thought riding with those guys might make me feel like a soldier again." I looked at him now, really looked. He was in his mid-30s maybe, younger than the lines in his face let on. His hands were trembling. "I didn't come to start nothin'. I came to feel like I used to." "You mean useful?" I asked. He blinked, surprised, then nodded. "Yeah, that's the word." I took a slow breath. My chest still ached from the shove. My voice came out quieter than I meant, but steadier than expected. "You don't make yourself useful by tearing people down, Reggie." "I know," he said quickly. "I know, that's why I'm still here." He pulled something from his vest, his dog tag, bent at the edge, stained with something that looked like dirt or dried blood. He held it in both palms like an offering. "I was 19 when they gave me this. I wore it under my uniform, then under my hoodie when I got kicked out, then under this vest, like it meant the same thing." He swallowed. "But today, it burned. Felt wrong, being near you and not doing anything." I looked down at the tag, then at him. "You looking for forgiveness?" He hesitated. "No, ma'am. I know I don't deserve that." I nodded slowly. "Good, because I'm not giving it." He looked startled, but I kept going. "I'm not here to hand out absolution like it's candy. I'm not here to make you feel better for standing still while someone tried to humiliate me." His shoulders slumped. "But," I said, "what I will give you is a choice." He looked up. I stepped forward, closed the distance between us, and looked him in the eye. "I don't need your apology. I need you to know this. You can still choose to live better, even now, especially now. You can still be a man who protects. You can still carry that dog tag and not let it rot into a badge of guilt." Reggie swallowed hard. "I've done bad things," he said. "I don't know if I can change." "You don't have to change the past," I told him. "Just make damn sure the next thing you do honors the uniform you wore, not the vest you picked up after." His lips tightened. Then, slowly, he nodded. I'll start by never riding with him again. I think that's a good start, I said. But don't do it for me. Do it for the guy who gave you that tag. Do it for the kid you used to be. He took a deep breath, slipped the tag back into his pocket. Thank you, he said quietly. I didn't answer, just gave him a single nod, turned back toward the bar counter, and left him standing in the shadow of what he could still become. It started the way these things always do now, with a blurry cell phone video and a caption that missed the point. Someone had recorded the entire confrontation at the veterans' bar. The laughter, the shirt being torn, the tattoo revealed, the general's voice cutting through it all like steel. And they posted it. By morning, it had over 8 million views. By lunch, my face was on 5 different cable news networks. They called me the silent Marine, the unknown daughter, the real soldier they called a fake. At first, it was surreal. My phone buzzed until it died. Reporters called my work line, then my supervisors. Someone sent flowers to the wrong Danielle Carter in Texas. My inbox was full of people telling me I was brave, that I was what America used to be. And then the other wave came in. The doubters, the skeptics, the professional deniers. Funny, one commentator said. I've worked at the Pentagon 15 years and never heard of a female PSYOPS operative getting out quietly like this. She could have faked the tattoo, someone else chimed in on a podcast. You can order them online. The worst were the ones who tried to connect it to politics. I became a symbol for everyone's agenda. To some, I was a quiet patriot. To others, I was a deep state plant. I wasn't even Danielle Carter anymore. I was content. Fuel for outrage. A thumbnail with a red circle and yellow arrows. A headline to argue under. Meanwhile, I still had to take the trash out. Still had to refill the printer at work. Still had to look my reflection in the mirror and ask myself if I'd done the right thing by staying silent so long. Then came the show. A primetime panel debate. Split screen, flashing graphics, ticker tape running across the bottom. And there, sitting on the far right couch, in a too small suit and a smug grin, was my brother. Michael. He'd been bailed out 2 days prior. Rumors said it was a biker fund, crowdfunded with names I didn't want to recognize. He looked cleaned up, shaved, shirt pressed. But the twitch in his jaw was still there. I could always see it when he lied. The host introduced him as former Corporal Michael Carter, decorated veteran, family of the woman at the center of the viral firestorm. Decorated. The word made bile rise in my throat. He smiled for the camera and said, I love my sister, but I think America deserves to know the truth. The audience leaned forward. I knew the rhythm by heart. He'd always known how to draw people in. She's not who she says she is, he continued. My sister's good at paperwork. Yeah, she worked admin. We all respect that. But I was there. I served. She didn't see combat. That tattoo. I never saw it growing up. Just showed up one day. I'm not saying she's lying, but I think people are getting the wrong idea. The host asked if he thought I was lying. Michael shrugged. I think she let people assume a lot of things, and she didn't stop them. Gaslight, deny, deflect. He had it down to muscle memory. I stared at the screen, numb. Part of me wanted to drive straight to the station and drag him off the air. Another part wanted to disappear into the floor. Instead, I turned off the TV. The next morning, a new hashtag trended. Show your papers, Danielle. Then, put a fake tattoo. Then, who is she really? A congressman even tweeted about me. If this woman is real, why hasn't she been recognized officially? The irony was too sharp to taste. I'd spent years ensuring my missions were never officially acknowledged. The silence was the point. It was how I kept people alive. How I stayed alive. But now, that silence felt like a cage. Even Nolan wasn't spared. A blogger dug up photos of him with my father, claiming it was all a PR stunt. Manufactured crisis. Emotional manipulation, they said. Someone even accused me of being a stolen valor plant, meant to distract from a government budget vote. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. Not because I was afraid, but because I realized the truth didn't stand a chance in a world that loved noise more than facts. Still, somewhere deep inside me, a stubborn voice whispered, "Stay the course, soldier. Stay upright. Stay human." I didn't want a stage. I didn't want a medal. I didn't want applause or folded flags or citations typed in official font. After the video went viral, Commandant Nolan called me to his office at the base. He didn't speak like a 4-star general that day. He just leaned back, arms crossed, eyes tired, and said, "We're planning a recognition event. Quiet, internal, only those who matter. I want you there." I stared at the coin on his desk, Marine Corps emblem polished to a mirror. "No," I said. He didn't argue. Just let the silence sit between us like it had so many years ago, back when I was a recruit in PSYOPS, and he was the one who signed off on my entry. "I know what you're going to say," I added, "but this isn't about humility, it's about choice." He waited, so I told him the truth. My father didn't get honored on a stage. He died in Desert Storm with a bullet in his side and sand in his mouth. His name wasn't on a broadcast. His funeral wasn't filmed. But he mattered. Nolan nodded. "And you do too." I shook my head. People are applauding me for something they don't understand. A tattoo, a clip, 7 words from a general. That's not who I am. That's just the surface. He didn't look offended, just thoughtful. "I don't need to be recognized because people finally noticed me," I said. "I didn't serve to be seen. I served so others wouldn't have to." He got up slowly, walked to the window. For a moment, I thought he'd let it drop. Instead, he said, "You don't have to stand on that stage, but you can't let someone else stand there in your place. Someone who didn't carry what you carried. Someone who didn't bleed when you bled." I turned away. He stepped closer, softened his tone. "Danielle, you think I'm asking you to put on a show. I'm not. I'm asking you to reclaim your name." That hit harder than I expected, because my name wasn't just mine anymore. It had been hijacked by the media, twisted by my brother, commented on, dissected, trended, doubted. My name had become a story that didn't belong to me. And Nolan? He was trying to give it back. I left the base that afternoon and went for a long walk. No earbuds, just the crunch of gravel beneath my boots and the wind cutting across the Potomac. At one point, I stopped at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. I hadn't planned to. My feet just brought me there. I found my father's name, Alan Carter, Major, United States Marine Corps. His name had no likes, no hashtags, no thumbnail, just etched stone, cold, still, permanent. I knelt, rested my palm over the letters, and I remembered. The way he carried me on his shoulders after his last homecoming. The way he kissed Mom's forehead before deployments. The dog tag Nolan had handed me when I was 14. "If you fall," Nolan had said back then, "I'll be behind you." And he had been. He still was. So I stood, pulled my coat closed, took one long breath. I still didn't want a stage. But maybe I wanted something else. The next day, I sent Nolan a message. Not a yes, but not a no either. Just 7 words typed with care. "I'll stand, just don't make me speak." He replied within minutes. "Fair, you've spoken more than enough already." The letter came in a plain envelope. No return address. Just a prison postmark and my name written in a hand I hadn't seen in years, but still recognized. Michael's handwriting had always been like him, uneven, too sharp in places, trailing off where it shouldn't. I opened it slowly, half expecting a trap. But there was only paper inside, lined, torn from a legal pad. No dramatic greeting, just 2 words at the top. "I'm sorry," he continued. "I know that won't mean much now, maybe it never did, but I had to say it. You didn't deserve what I did to you. Not at the bar, not at the reunion, not at the funeral, not when I laughed behind your back and told people you were a secretary with a complex." I read it once, then again. I sat down before continuing. "You probably remember the day Dad died. I do. Not the news, just you. You were 14, I was 17. Mom collapsed in the kitchen. I remember the way the phone cord curled around her wrist. I remember thinking, someone should say something, but it wasn't me, it was you. You didn't cry, you held her. You walked her to the couch. You poured her a glass of water. Then you started calling people, the school, the church, the unit chaplain. You were just a kid, but you became an adult overnight. That night, you sat with Mom while she fell asleep. And you told me, we're not going to break. He wouldn't want that." I felt the air shift in my chest, as if the words themselves were reaching backward through time to hold that younger version of me. A few years later, you went into the Marines. Quietly, no drama, I didn't even know until Mom said you'd left." She cried again, but this time she smiled while she did it. I was furious. You were supposed to be the soft one, the quiet one, the kid who fixed the sink, made soup when I was sick, stayed invisible. I didn't understand. And the truth? I resented you for it. His words became less structured, emotions crowding grammar. I couldn't get in. You knew that. I tried. But the record didn't lie. The shoplifting, the vandalism, and later, well, you know what I did. And still, you covered for me. When that weapons cache went missing on base, you made it disappear from the logs. I don't know why. Maybe you thought you owed me. Maybe you thought if you helped, I'd finally grow up. I didn't. I just took more. Until there was nothing left to take but your dignity. I swallowed hard. Because it was true. I mocked you in front of those bikers because I thought that would make me look like a man. But when the general said those words, those 7 words, I knew I had failed. I saw your wrist, the tattoo, and in that moment I remembered the way you held Mom when she broke. The way you showed up for the country when the country had already taken your father. Danielle, I mocked the only real soldier I've ever known. You didn't scream. You didn't hit me. You just stood. And somehow, that hurt worse than any punch you could have thrown. I stopped there, let the silence in my apartment hold me. Then read the last few lines. They're transferring me next week. I don't know if I'll ever get out. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know. You were always the strong one, and I was too weak to admit it. Michael, I folded the letter carefully, set it beside Nolan's old box of ribbons and brass stars. I didn't cry. I didn't call him. I just sat, still, upright. I had nothing left to prove to him. But somewhere inside that broken man was still the boy I used to chase fireflies with in our backyard. And somehow, the apology felt real. I didn't know what came next. But I knew this. The truth, when it finally arrives, even late, doesn't change the past, but it can stop the bleeding. I went back to Murphy's on a Thursday morning. It had rained the night before, and the gravel outside still shimmered with damp dust. The neon sign blinked slow and tired, like always. I pushed the door open and let the familiar chime echo through the half-empty bar. Nobody gasped, nobody whispered, no one raised a phone. The viral wave had passed. Now I was just Danielle again. I tied my apron behind my back and walked behind the counter like I always had. The coffee pot hissed its usual rhythm. I refilled the creamer, wiped down the bar top, then turned the burner low so the eggs wouldn't stick if anyone asked for breakfast. The jukebox played old country in the corner, Johnny Cash this time, not the loud stuff. The kind of music that reminds you not everything broken has to be thrown out. I didn't need applause. I didn't want it. Silence was its own kind of mercy. A young man, barely shaving age, sat alone in one of the booths by the wall. He wore a worn field jacket too big for him, sleeves rolled twice at the wrist. His head was down, fingers nervously toying with the edge of his dog tag. I didn't ask his name. Didn't need to. He looked like every young recruit I'd ever seen. Too much weight behind the eyes, not enough behind the shoulders. After a few minutes, he got up and wandered toward the bar. I poured him a black coffee before he asked. He looked surprised but didn't argue. He sipped. Then he asked it. The question always comes eventually. Did you ever get scared? His voice cracked just enough to remind me he wasn't used to being taken seriously yet. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. Yes, I said simply. He blinked, waiting for more, so I added, I got scared all the time. His brow tightened, not judgment, just confusion. So I kept going. I've been scared in deserts where the wind carried more than sand. I've been scared in briefing rooms where the air got thin because someone lied and we all knew it. I've been scared in silence, when the comms cut and no one moved. And I've been scared here, in this town, at this bar, that someone might see me and recognize nothing at all. The boy swallowed. He didn't speak. But I continued. I wasn't scared of dying, not really. He tilted his head slightly. I was scared, I said, that if I didn't stand up, someone weaker than me would fall, and they wouldn't get back up. The jukebox clicked softly, shifting to another song. A Willie Nelson tune now. The young man nodded once, then looked down at his cup. He stayed quiet, but the tightness in his shoulders eased. His hands stopped twitching. Sometimes what we need isn't advice, just permission. Permission to be human, to feel fear, to move through it. He left a few dollars on the counter and walked out without saying more. I watched him go. His steps were a little more certain than when he came in. I poured myself a cup after that, sat on the stool by the sink, and looked out the window at the parking lot. My own reflection looked back at me in the smudged glass. Older, tired, but standing. Murphy's went quiet again. Someone in the back laughed, probably Reggie, telling a story I'd heard a dozen times already. Nolan's photo still hung above the bar, next to the folded flag from Major Carter's memorial. No one had touched them. Dust gathered. Life went on. And me? I wasn't a legend. I wasn't a mystery. I was just a woman who had stood still long enough for the world to remember what she'd once done. I wiped my hands on my apron and brewed a fresh pot. The box had waited long enough. I placed it on the counter at Murphy's before opening it. The wood was dark and old, the kind that holds warmth even when the world doesn't. No lock, just a small brass latch I undid with one hand, while the other steadied my breath. Inside lay the first thing I ever remembered about my father, his dog tag, Major Alan Carter. It still bore the slight dent near the chain loop, a mark he said came from the first time he'd ever taken shrapnel. He never told me the full story, but Nolan once said it happened in Kuwait, near Highway 80. They were under fire, and my dad covered another man's retreat with nothing but a sidearm and a prayer. The tag clinked softly as I lifted it. The chain was wrapped twice, looped like it had been wound with care, not haste. Below it lay something else, folded into thirds, tucked neatly in a sealed plastic sleeve. I opened it carefully, not paper, vellum, yellowed with time and humidity, but still intact. It was a hand-drawn map, not a copy, not a reprint. My father's lines. I recognized the tight, squared-off handwriting, the grid system he always favored. Left corner was marked, Alt Plan, 14th Hour, Desert Storm. It wasn't just any plan. It was a fallback route, an escape vector in case the convoy got hit from both flanks. I traced it with my fingers, the ridge lines, the dried riverbeds, the X marks in pencil. 3 names were written near the bottom in small, tight print. Alan Carter, Nolan Graves, R.L. Tanner. They had fought together, and clearly planned to die together if it had come to that. But they didn't. Only Alan didn't come back. The box didn't contain a medal, no certificate, no flag. Just these 2 things. A dog tag and a map drawn in a desert where no one thought heroes still made plans. I held the tag to my chest for a while before moving. Murphy's had quieted again. It was between the lunch and evening rush. I knew I wouldn't be interrupted. I walked slowly to the corner of the bar, the one with the little shelf most people overlooked. We'd always called it the wall. There were 3 framed photos there. One was of my father in uniform, squinting into the sun, rifle slung over his shoulder, standing between 2 men in matching fatigues. They looked too serious to be smiling, but the glint in their eyes told another story. Brotherhood, survival, history no one else was allowed to read. The second frame held Nolan, though younger, colonel, not commandant. Leaner, sharper, eyes like steel and dust. The third was added later, a folded flag. No name, just the words, "We remember." I stood in front of them for a moment. Then I reached up and hung the dog tag next to my father's photo. I didn't need to hammer anything. A tiny hook was already there. Nolan must have placed it, though he'd never said. The chain dangled softly. The tag didn't shine. It was too worn for that. But it held its place like it always had, solid and unshaken. Next, I opened a small acrylic display frame and slid the map inside. I set it on the shelf, leaned slightly back so the glare wouldn't catch it in the wrong light. I positioned it beneath the dog tag. And then I stepped back, not to admire, not for closure, but because I needed to give it space to breathe. I wanted that corner to feel like a resting place, not of grief, but of return. He had drawn the line home. It was time I brought it all the way. I didn't cry. That surprised me. Maybe I thought I would. Maybe I had before, and now there was nothing left but stillness. But I did whisper something, just a few words. I saw it through, Dad. Because I had. I didn't carry a gun at the end, not anymore. But I carried the story, I carried the memory, I carried what mattered. And I placed it here, not to be worshipped, not to be venerated, but so that no one else would ever have to wonder if Alan Carter had been real. He was, and he still is. Behind me, someone entered the bar. The bell jingled. I heard the soft scrape of boots on tile, the scent of fresh air mixing with coffee. I didn't turn around. Let them see it. Let them read the names. Let them know. Sometimes the greatest victories don't end with fanfare. Sometimes they end with a small wooden box and a daughter who refused to forget. I never reopened the bar to make a statement. Murphy's just stayed open because I didn't want it to become another abandoned place where stories went to die. But something changed after the video. Not the online buzz that came and went like a wave. Not the praise or the arguments or even the speaking invitations I never accepted. It was something quieter. Every few days, someone would walk in and hesitate at the door. Sometimes in uniform, sometimes not. A patch on a denim jacket. A nervous glance toward the corner where my father's dog tag hung. A few even knew the name Alan Carter, but more often they just stared at the photo wall for a long, long time. And then they'd sit. Not to drink, to talk, to ask, or just to be. It started with one young Marine, barely 20. He ordered a soda, then sat there for an hour before finally asking, "Did it ever get easier?" I didn't lie. I told him it got different, and that he didn't have to be strong every day. Only today, only this one. Another day, it was a woman who used to be an army translator. She left because no one believed her report about harassment overseas. She asked if I ever felt invisible, even in uniform. I just nodded and said, "All the time." That's how I learned to watch everything. By the end of that first month, I had a quiet list of names and numbers. Young vets who had no one else to call at 2 a.m. A few were still drinking too hard. Some were going to counseling. Others weren't ready yet. So I made the mentorship program official. Nothing fancy. No government tie-in. Just the second watch. We meet twice a month. We talk, we listen. We don't record, we don't post. We don't fix what can't be fixed. We just hold space. Sometimes the strongest thing you can offer is silence that doesn't judge. I don't wear the uniform anymore. My rank doesn't follow me in here. But when people ask what I do now, I smile. I still serve, I say. One person, one story, one day at a time. That's what I inherited. Not a legacy of medals, but a map of how to stay. Not orders, but presence. Not fame, but follow through. It was the same lesson Nolan taught me when I bled out in that field hospital and he sat beside me. Not as my commander, but as the man who refused to let me be left behind. It's the same lesson I remember when I look at Michael's handwriting from the prison letter, shaky but honest. "I was always jealous you never cried when Dad died," he wrote. "But now I realize it wasn't because you weren't grieving. It's because you carried us." He's right. I carried him. I carried all of us. Because that's what service really is. It's not just sacrifice. It's the quiet continuation of care. And if you've listened this far, if this story found you in a moment where your own silence felt heavy, then I need you to hear this next part. You're not alone. Whatever you've lost, whatever you carry, whatever scars don't show on the outside, you are not broken beyond repair. You are not weak for feeling tired. You are not forgotten just because the world is loud and fast and cruel. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk through a door like Murphy's and ask for water and a chair. Sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. So if you're out there, listening in your own silence, I hope this reminded you of something real. I hope you find your own map home, even if it takes years. And I hope you remember, the story doesn't end just because your rank changed. The mission doesn't vanish just because no one salutes. The service continues. One person, one story, one day. That's what I serve now. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. I read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, I hope you carry this story with you. And remember, you don't need a title to lead. You don't need a medal to matter. You just need to stand, once, when it counts. Take care. We'll see you in the next story.